The early morning sun cast a golden glow through the tall windows of Lavender Heights as Jasmine Taylor tied her apron around her waist. The restaurant stood like a palace among the upscale shops and boutiques in the wealthy side of town. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, and the smell of fresh flowers mixed with the aroma of gourmet food being prepared in the kitchen. Jasmine checked her reflection in the polished surface of a serving tray. Her dark curly hair was neatly pulled back, showing off her kind brown eyes that somehow still sparkled despite waking up at 5 a.m. for her morning classes. At 28, she wasn't like most of the other waitstaff, younger college kids working for pocket money. Jasmine was fighting for something bigger. "Hey, you ready for the lunch rush?" asked Thomas, a fellow waiter who'd become a friend over the years. Table 12 already called to make sure they get the corner spot. Rich people and their special tables, Jasmine laughed, shaking her head. "I'm ready. 3 years here and nothing surprises me anymore." That wasn't entirely true. Some days still tested her patience, especially when customers looked right through her as if she were invisible. But Jasmine had learned to smile through it all. The tips from one good weekend at Lavender Heights equaled what she'd make in 2 weeks at most other places in town. As she arranged fresh silverware on a table, Jasmine's mind drifted to the stack of textbooks waiting for her at home. Her psychology professor had praised her latest paper on social dynamics and prejudice, saying it showed real promise. Just 1 more year of graduate school, and she could finally pursue her real dream, opening a community center for underprivileged kids. "Earth to Jasmine," called Thomas, snapping his fingers playfully. "Your section's filling up." Jasmine quickly finished the table setting and straightened her uniform. The lunch crowd was beginning to arrive, men in expensive suits talking loudly into their phones, women with designer handbags who brunched here weekly, and the occasional celebrity hiding behind sunglasses. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her sister Zoe. "Don't forget I need the registration fee for summer classes by Friday." Jasmine took a deep breath. Since their parents' accident 3 years ago, she'd become both sister and parent to 19-year-old Zoe. Every dollar mattered. Every tip counted. Every smile she forced through gritted teeth was for their future. "Good morning, welcome to Lavender Heights." Jasmine greeted her first table with genuine warmth, despite the woman barely looking up from her phone to acknowledge her. By noon, the restaurant hummed with activity. Jasmine moved efficiently between tables, remembering which guest wanted their dressing on the side and who needed their water without ice. Her feet already ached, but she maintained her poise and friendly demeanor. "The scallops are especially good today," she recommended to a middle-aged couple who seemed kinder than most. They smiled up at her, and the woman actually asked about her day. A small kindness that wasn't common among the restaurant's elite clientele. Between serving courses and refilling drinks, Jasmine noticed the restaurant manager eyeing the entrance with a slight grimace. Something about his expression made her stomach tighten. After 3 years, she knew that look. It meant trouble was walking through the door. "Jasmine," he called, gesturing her over with a subtle wave. "She's asking for your section again." She didn't need to ask who she was. Some customers were just part of the job. The demanding ones, the impatient ones, the ones who found fault with everything. But few made the entire staff tense up like Victoria Harrington did when she entered the room. Jasmine nodded, squaring her shoulders. "No problem. I've got this." Whatever happened today, she would handle it with grace. She always did. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't about the rich people who looked down on her. It was about Zoe's future. It was about her degree. It was about proving to herself that she could rise above it all. The front doors of Lavender Heights swung open with more force than necessary, and the restaurant's gentle buzz of conversation dimmed for a moment. Victoria Harrington had arrived. She stood in the entryway, taking her time to remove her designer sunglasses and hand her cashmere coat to the host. Behind her trailed 3 women who looked like they'd stepped out of a luxury magazine. All perfect hair, red-bottomed shoes, and handbags that cost more than Jasmine's monthly rent. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Harrington," said the host, trying to hide his nervousness. "Your usual table." Victoria scanned the restaurant like a queen surveying her kingdom. "No, I want to sit by the window today, in Jasmine's section." The mention of her name made Jasmine freeze mid-pour at a nearby table. She carefully finished filling the water glass, nodded politely to her current customers, and took a deep, steadying breath before turning around. Victoria Harrington was 45 years old, but looked younger thanks to whatever expensive treatments kept her skin glowing and her figure trim. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves around her shoulders, and diamonds sparkled at her ears, wrist, and throat. She was beautiful in the cold way that statues are beautiful, flawless but without warmth. "Did she ask for you again?" whispered Thomas as he passed by with a tray of appetizers. "What's her deal with you?" Jasmine shrugged, but she had her theories. Over the last 6 months, Victoria had specifically requested Jasmine's section every time she visited. At first, Jasmine thought it was because she provided good service. She quickly realized it was something else entirely. Victoria seemed to enjoy making her work harder than necessary. The host led Victoria and her friends to their table, pulling out chairs and unfolding napkins with extra flourish. Jasmine watched as the women settled in, already laughing too loudly about someone who wasn't there to defend themselves. "That's Diane Fulton with her," muttered Angela, another waitress. "The one with the red hair. She's on the hospital board. The other two are new." "Great," Jasmine sighed. A whole table of Victoria clones. She straightened her uniform, put on her professional smile, and approached the table. "Good afternoon, ladies. Welcome to Lavender Heights. Can I start you with some beverages?" Victoria looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly as she examined Jasmine from head to toe. "Well, if it isn't our favorite waitress. Ladies, this is the one I was telling you about." The women all turned to stare at Jasmine with curious expressions that made her skin prickle. Whatever Victoria had told them, it couldn't have been kind. "We'll have a bottle of the Veuve Clicquot," Victoria said, not bothering to consult her friends. "And make sure it's properly chilled this time. Last month's was practically room temperature." It hadn't been, but Jasmine nodded politely. "Of course, Mrs. Harrington. I'll bring that right away." As Jasmine walked toward the bar, she could hear Victoria's voice carrying clearly across the restaurant. "You see what I mean? These service people need constant supervision." The bartender, Lewis, saw Jasmine's face as she approached. "Victoria's back, huh? With reinforcements this time?" "Yep. Bottle of the Veuve, and make it extra cold, or I'll never hear the end of it." Lewis gave her a sympathetic look as he retrieved the champagne. "Why does she always pick on you? There are like 20 servers here." Jasmine shrugged again, but the truth was she had noticed a pattern. Victoria seemed to reserve her worst behavior for the few staff members of color. It wasn't something Jasmine could prove, but the feeling was there, sitting heavy in her stomach. When she returned with the champagne, Victoria was in the middle of a story about firing her housekeeper for missing a spot on her marble countertop. Her friends laughed on cue, like this casual cruelty was the height of humor. And then she had the nerve to ask for a recommendation letter. Victoria finished as Jasmine carefully uncorked the bottle. "As if I would help someone who clearly doesn't understand basic cleanliness." The cork came free with a satisfying pop, and Jasmine began pouring into the flutes. Victoria suddenly fell silent, watching Jasmine's every move like a hawk. The other women glanced between them, sensing the tension. "We're ready to order," Victoria announced, though they hadn't even looked at the menus. "I'll have the seared scallops, no butter, extra lemon, and bring extra napkins. The quality of the linens here has really gone downhill." Jasmine wrote it down, her pen pressing a little harder than necessary against her notepad. Something told her this was going to be a very long lunch service. Jasmine balanced 4 plates of appetizers along her arm as she approached Victoria's table. She'd spent the last 15 minutes running back and forth from the kitchen because each lady had special requests for their starters. No capers on this one. Extra lemon on that one. This one needed to be gluten-free suddenly, though they hadn't mentioned it before. "Here we are, ladies. Tuna tartare, modified as requested," Jasmine said, carefully placing each dish in front of its proper owner. Victoria inspected her plate as though searching for evidence at a crime scene. She poked at the delicate arrangement of fish with her fork, frowning. "This isn't what I ordered. The tuna is supposed to be diced, not minced." Jasmine blinked. The chef had prepared it exactly as Victoria ordered it, the same way she always ordered it. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harrington. Would you like me to have the kitchen prepare another?" Obviously, Victoria said with an exaggerated sigh. She turned to her friends. This happens every time. It's like playing a game of telephone with these people. The woman with red hair, Diane, patted Victoria's hand sympathetically while giving Jasmine a look that somehow managed to be both pitying and dismissive. Jasmine returned to the kitchen, where Chef Paolo threw his hands up when she explained the situation. Minced? Diced? It's the same thing. She's making things up, he exclaimed, but he still prepared a new plate. The kitchen staff had learned long ago that arguing with Victoria Harrington's requests only made things worse. When Jasmine returned with the new appetizer, Victoria barely glanced at it before declaring it acceptable. But her water glass was now apparently too warm, the bread too hard, and the lighting too bright where she was sitting. Is there anything else I can help with? Jasmine asked, maintaining her composure despite the growing knot in her stomach. Just try to keep up, Victoria said with a thin smile. For the next 30 minutes, Jasmine moved efficiently between tables, making sure all her customers were happy, especially Victoria's table, which required twice the attention of all her other tables combined. As she approached with their main courses, she could hear Victoria telling a story about some charity gala she'd attended. And then the waitress, if you can call her that, spilled champagne all over Constance's Oscar de la Renta. Can you imagine? These people they hire nowadays have absolutely no training. Jasmine pretended not to hear as she carefully set down their plates. Victoria had ordered the scallops, which required extra attention when serving. Mrs. Fulton, your sea bass, Jasmine said, placing the dish in front of the redhead. Mrs. Chen, your risotto. Mrs. Harrington, your scallops with extra lemon, no butter. As Jasmine reached for the wine bottle to refill their glasses, she noticed Victoria watching her every move. She concentrated extra hard, determined not to make any mistakes. She'd done this hundreds of times, pour with the label facing up, twist slightly when finishing to prevent drips. But as she poured Victoria's wine, her hand betrayed her. Maybe it was nerves or fatigue from the double shift the day before, but a single drop of the red wine escaped, landing on the pristine white tablecloth. Victoria gasped as though Jasmine had thrown the entire bottle at her. "Oh my," she said, her voice suddenly louder than before. Several nearby diners glanced over. "I suppose attention to detail isn't emphasized where you come from." Jasmine felt her cheeks grow warm as she quickly dabbed at the tiny spot with her serving cloth. "I'm very sorry about that, Mrs. Harrington." Victoria looked her up and down, taking in Jasmine's dark skin, her curly hair, her simple uniform. "Maybe this job is a bit too sophisticated for someone like you." The words hung in the air like poison. One of the women at the table, Mrs. Chen, looked down at her plate, clearly uncomfortable. The other two smiled slightly, complicit in Victoria's cruelty. Jasmine felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just a difficult customer anymore. The comment was too pointed, the meaning too clear. But she had worked too hard for too long to let this woman get to her. "The wine will be removed from your bill," Jasmine said evenly. "Can I get you anything else for your main course?" Victoria's eyes narrowed, perhaps disappointed that her barb hadn't drawn blood. "Just try not to spill anything else. This blouse is worth more than you probably make in a month." The lunch rush at Lavender Heights was finally slowing down. Most tables were finishing their desserts or lingering over coffee, but Victoria's group showed no signs of leaving. They were on their second bottle of wine, voices growing louder with each glass. Jasmine's feet ached as she checked on her other tables. An elderly couple thanked her warmly as they left, the gentleman slipping her an extra $20 bill. "You've been wonderful," he whispered with a kind smile that briefly lifted her spirits. That small kindness made Victoria's table all the more jarring when she returned to it. Victoria was in the middle of a story, gesturing with her wine glass. "And then I told her, 'Honey, not everyone is meant to live in this neighborhood.' You should have seen her face." Victoria laughed, and her friends joined in, though Mrs. Chen's smile seemed forced. Jasmine began clearing their empty plates. "Would any of you like to see our dessert menu?" "Oh, she speaks," Victoria said, as though surprised. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about us." "I apologize if you felt neglected," Jasmine said, keeping her voice steady. "We've been quite busy today." Victoria waved her hand dismissively. Yes, everyone's busy. Bring us the dessert menus and some espresso, and make sure the cups are properly warmed this time. As Jasmine walked away, she heard Victoria's voice clearly. Have you noticed her hair? I mean, wouldn't you think if you worked in a place like this, you'd try to look a bit more professional? The red-haired woman, Diane, giggled. It's so big. Exactly, Victoria said. It's distracting. There should be standards. Jasmine's hand tightened around the stack of plates she was carrying. Her hair was neatly pulled back in accordance with the restaurant's dress code. There was nothing unprofessional about it. In the kitchen, Louise noticed her expression. What did the witch say now? Nothing worth repeating, Jasmine replied, loading dishes into the dishwasher. When she returned with dessert menus, Victoria immediately launched into questions about Jasmine's background. So, where did you go to school? Victoria asked, interrupting Jasmine's description of the day's special desserts. I'm actually finishing my master's degree now, Jasmine answered, caught off guard by the personal question. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Really? Where? At State University. Victoria exchanged glances with Diane. State? Well, I suppose that's nice. My daughters would never consider anywhere but Ivy League, of course. The third woman, who hadn't spoken much, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Shall I give you a few minutes to look over the dessert options? Jasmine asked, trying to redirect the conversation. I'm curious, Victoria continued as if Jasmine hadn't spoken. How does someone like you afford graduate school? Do they have special scholarships for? Victoria, Mrs. Chen interrupted suddenly. I think I'll have the chocolate souffle. Jasmine gave Mrs. Chen a grateful glance and took their dessert orders, escaping back to the kitchen as quickly as possible. Other diners were beginning to notice the tension. An older woman at a nearby table caught Jasmine's eye and shook her head sympathetically. A young couple whispered to each other, glancing over at Victoria's table with disapproval. By the time Jasmine brought their desserts, Victoria seemed determined to escalate the situation. When Jasmine set down her creme brulee, Victoria inspected it with a frown. This doesn't look right, she declared. The sugar isn't caramelized properly. The dessert was perfectly prepared. The sugar topping was a beautiful amber color, exactly as it should be. I'm sorry it's not to your liking, Jasmine said. Would you like me to bring you something else? No, I want to speak to your manager, Victoria announced loudly. This whole experience has been disappointing. The restaurant manager, David, appeared almost instantly, his expression concerned. Is there a problem, Mrs. Harrington? Victoria gestured at Jasmine. I'm just not sure she belongs in a place like this, she said, staring directly at Jasmine's skin. Her meaning couldn't have been clearer if she'd spelled it out. The restaurant fell silent. Even the kitchen staff, visible through the open serving window, stopped what they were doing. David's face flushed with anger, but before he could speak, the older woman from the nearby table stood up. Excuse me, she said in a voice that carried authority. Did I just hear what I think I heard? Jasmine stood frozen, caught between humiliation and a strange sense of detachment, as though she were watching the scene from above rather than living it. The restaurant manager, David, cleared his throat. Mrs. Harrington, I assure you that Jasmine is one of our finest servers. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding? Victoria sniffed. I don't think so. I'm simply suggesting that certain people might be better suited to different environments. That's hardly controversial. The older woman who had stood up from the nearby table took a step forward. She was in her 60s, elegantly dressed in a navy pantsuit, with silver hair cut in a stylish bob. Actually, she said, it is controversial when you're clearly referring to someone's race. Her voice was calm but carried throughout the now silent restaurant. Victoria's face flushed red. I never said anything about race. This is ridiculous. I'm a valued customer here. David looked torn between keeping a wealthy regular customer happy and doing the right thing. Mrs. Harrington, we pride ourselves on treating all our staff and guests with respect. And I've been disrespected by receiving subpar service, Victoria countered. Now, if you don't mind, we'd like to finish our desserts in peace. She turned pointedly away from both David and the older woman. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jasmine stood perfectly still, her face a careful mask hiding the storm of emotions inside her. Years of similar experiences had taught her that showing any reaction would only make things worse. she'd be labeled angry or difficult, labels that could cost her this job she desperately needed. "Will there be anything else?" she asked quietly. Victoria didn't even look at her, just the check. "We've wasted enough time here." David gave Jasmine's shoulder a gentle squeeze before walking away. It was a small gesture of support, but it meant something. As Jasmine headed to print the check, she heard the conversations around the restaurant slowly resuming, many in hushed, disapproving tones. At the bar, Lewis and Thomas were watching the scene with protective expressions. "You okay?" Louise asked as she approached to run the credit card slip. "I'm fine," Jasmine said automatically, though they both knew it wasn't true. The computer screen showed Victoria's bill, $318.47 for the lunch and 2 bottles of wine. Jasmine printed the check and placed it in a leather folder, returning to the table where Victoria and her friends were gathering their things. "Your check, ladies," Jasmine said, placing it in the center of the table. Victoria snatched it up, eyeing the total with exaggerated scrutiny. Then she turned to her friends with a mean little smile. "Let me show you how to handle these situations." She pulled a $20 bill from her designer wallet and placed it on top of the check with a flourish. $20 on a $300 bill, not even 7%. "Perhaps this will motivate you to find work better suited to your capabilities," Victoria said loudly. The insult was calculated for maximum humiliation. Victoria wanted everyone to see her put Jasmine in her place. Her friends looked uncomfortable now. Mrs. Chen was staring at her lap, and the quiet one was checking her phone with unusual intensity. Only Diane was still playing along, a smirk on her face. Jasmine felt a curious calm settle over her. Something had shifted inside. She'd endured countless small cruelties and prejudices in her life. Teachers who seemed surprised when she did well, store security that followed her but not white shoppers, people who spoke slowly to her as though she might not understand complex words. Usually, she let these moments pass, telling herself that rising above was the wisest choice, that staying silent was strategic, not weak. That one day, when she finished her degree and had her own practice, these people wouldn't matter. But something about Victoria's smug expression, the public nature of the insult, and the silent witnesses all around them made this moment different. Jasmine looked at the $20 bill. She looked at Victoria's expectant face, clearly waiting for tears or anger, or some reaction she could use to further prove her point about people like Jasmine not belonging in places like this. Instead, Jasmine took a deep breath and stood tall. A strange sense of power flowed through her, not the angry, defensive kind, but something steadier and more certain. For the first time all day, she felt fully herself, not the carefully constructed professional persona she wore like armor. "Is there a problem with the service?" she asked, her voice clear and unwavering. Victoria blinked, clearly surprised that Jasmine wasn't shrinking away in shame or rushing off in tears. "Excuse me. I asked if there was a problem with the service," Jasmine repeated calmly. She felt strangely light, as though a weight she'd been carrying for years had suddenly lifted. The restaurant had gone quiet again. Even the kitchen staff had paused to watch what was happening. Victoria glanced around, suddenly aware that she was the center of attention, but not in the way she wanted to be. "The service was," Victoria began, then faltered. Without Jasmine's usual polite deference, Victoria seemed unsure how to proceed. "Miss Harrington," Jasmine said, her voice clear and steady enough to carry throughout the now silent restaurant. "I've served you with respect today, despite your attempts to make me feel less than." Victoria's mouth opened in shock. No one ever spoke to her this way, especially not someone she considered beneath her. "How dare you?" she started, but Jasmine continued as though Victoria hadn't spoken. "What you don't know is that I'm completing my master's degree in social psychology next month." Victoria's face froze in a mixture of surprise and disbelief. Her friends exchanged glances. Mrs. Chen looked impressed, while Diane seemed skeptical. "My thesis," Jasmine continued, "is actually on privilege and performative elitism in social settings." She smiled then genuinely. "Your behavior today has provided exceptional material for my research. Thank you for that." Someone at a corner table let out a low whistle. Victoria's face had turned a deep shade of red, her hand clutching her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles were white. "You can't speak to me like this," Victoria sputtered. "I'll have you fired." "For what?" Jasmine asked simply. "For thanking you for contributing to academic research, or for serving you professionally despite your rudeness." The quiet woman at Victoria's table suddenly coughed to hide what sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Diane nudged her sharply with an elbow. Jasmine picked up the $20 bill Victoria had left and placed it back on the table. "And to answer your question, yes, I do belong here. I belong anywhere I choose to be. And so does anyone else who works hard and treats others with dignity." The words seemed to hang in the air. Jasmine hadn't raised her voice or shown anger. Her response wasn't a heated comeback or an insult, it was simply the truth, spoken with quiet confidence. Victoria looked stunned, as though Jasmine had suddenly transformed into someone unrecognizable, someone she couldn't intimidate or dismiss. "Who do you think?" Victoria began, but the older woman who had spoken up earlier cut her off. "I think she's someone who just showed more class in 30 seconds than you've displayed in your entire time here," the woman said. Then she turned to Jasmine. "Well said, young lady." Victoria looked around for support, but found none. Even her friends were avoiding eye contact. Mrs. Chen was studying the dessert menu as though it contained the secrets of the universe. The quiet woman was texting rapidly on her phone, her face angled away from Victoria. The realization seemed to dawn on Victoria that she had lost control of the situation and, perhaps more importantly, of how others perceived her. Her carefully constructed image of sophistication and superiority had cracked, revealing something ugly underneath that everyone could now see clearly. For a woman like Victoria, whose entire identity was built around status and admiration, this public unmasking was devastating. This is ridiculous," Victoria stammered, grabbing her purse. "Come on, ladies, we're leaving." But as Victoria stood to leave, none of her friends immediately followed. There was an awkward moment where she stood alone, her authority over them suddenly in question. Diane finally got up, but Mrs. Chen lingered, reaching into her own wallet. She pulled out a $100 bill and placed it on the table. "For your education fund," she said quietly to Jasmine, "and I apologize for not speaking up sooner." Victoria stood at the edge of the table, her face a mixture of rage and humiliation as her carefully cultivated social circle began to crumble before her eyes. The restaurant erupted in applause, not loud, not rowdy, but the kind of sincere clapping that comes when people witness something truly meaningful. Victoria's face turned from red to nearly purple as she realized that everyone was applauding Jasmine, not her. "This is ridiculous," Victoria hissed, grabbing her designer purse. "I've never been treated so poorly in my life." But no one was listening to her anymore. Mrs. Chen slid out from the table and placed her hand briefly on Jasmine's arm. "That took courage," she said quietly. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." The third woman in Victoria's group, a tall woman with a sleek bob, pulled out her wallet and added another bill to Mrs. Chen's 100. "For your education," she said with a small smile. "And because someone needs to make up for all the times Victoria has undertipped you." Victoria stood alone now, her social circle crumbling before her eyes. "Diane," she snapped. "Are you coming?" Diane hesitated, glancing between Victoria and the other women. For a moment, it seemed like she might break ranks too. But old habits die hard, and she hurried to Victoria's side, avoiding everyone's eyes. As Victoria headed for the exit, a middle-aged man in an elegant grey suit stepped into her path. Though Jasmine had only seen him a handful of times, everyone knew Richard Patel, the owner of Lavender Heights. "Mrs. Harrington," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle for the steel beneath it. "A word, please." Victoria lifted her chin. "Richard, this waitress has been completely unprofessional. I heard everything," Mr. Patel interrupted. "And I've been hearing about your behavior from my staff for months now." Victoria's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "At Lavender Heights, we value respect above all else," Mr. Patel continued. "I'm afraid your patronage will no longer be welcome here." The restaurant had gone quiet again, everyone straining to hear. Victoria seemed to shrink before their eyes, her power evaporating as quickly as morning dew in summer. You can't be serious," she whispered. "Entirely serious," Mr. Patel replied. "David will handle your bill." "Good day, Mrs. Harrington." As Victoria shuffled toward the door, Diane trailing behind her like a deflated balloon, the older woman in the navy pantsuit approached Jasmine. "Penny Garcia," she introduced herself, extending a hand. "I run a publishing house downtown." "That was quite something, young lady. Here's my card. I'd love to talk about your research when you finish your degree." Jasmine accepted the card with shaking hands. Everything felt surreal, like she might wake up any minute from this strange dream where people actually faced consequences for their actions. "Thank you," she managed. Mr. Patel turned to Jasmine. "Take the rest of the day off," he said. "With pay, of course." Before Jasmine could respond, her fellow waiters and the kitchen staff surrounded her, patting her back and offering congratulations. Louis gave her a high five, while Thomas made a show of bowing dramatically. "The Queen has spoken," he joked, making everyone laugh. The tension that had filled the restaurant just minutes ago had transformed into something warm and celebratory. Even the customers were smiling, some raising their water glasses in small toasts to Jasmine as she walked through to the back room. In the staff locker room, Jasmine finally had a moment alone. Her hands were still trembling slightly as she reached for her phone. 3 missed texts from her sister Zoe. "How's work going?" "Did you ask about picking up extra shifts next weekend?" "Hello?" "Earth to big sis?" Jasmine smiled and typed back, "You won't believe what just happened." As she changed out of her uniform, her mind kept replaying the moment. It wasn't about putting Victoria in her place. It wasn't even about standing up for herself, though that felt good too. It was about speaking truth calmly in the face of cruelty, showing that dignity doesn't depend on designer clothes or social status. When she emerged from the back room, most of the lunch crowd had cleared out. The elderly couple who had been kind to her earlier was still there, lingering over coffee. The gentleman beckoned her over. "Young lady," he said, "my wife and I want you to know how impressed we were with how you handled that situation." His wife nodded, her eyes twinkling. "It reminded me of something that happened to me back in 1965, she said. "I was the first woman in my law firm, and the things people said." She shook her head. "But unlike you, I didn't find my voice until years later." "We wanted to give you this," the man said, handing her an envelope. "Consider it an investment in your future." Jasmine tried to refuse, but they insisted. Later, when she opened it at the bus stop, she found a check for $1,000 with a note that read, "For your education and your voice. The world needs both." That evening, as she sat at her small kitchen table helping Zoe with her biology homework, Jasmine's phone pinged with a notification. Someone had posted about the incident on social media, and it was gaining traction. There were already hundreds of comments praising her response, with many sharing their own experiences of standing up to prejudice. "So you're famous now?" Zoe teased, peering at the phone. "Hardly," Jasmine laughed. "But maybe something good will come from this. Maybe someone else will find their voice too." The next morning, Jasmine woke up to an email from her psychology professor. The subject line read, "Your thesis, real-world application." She opened it to find that her professor had heard about the incident and wanted to include it as a case study in an upcoming book on social psychology and everyday resistance to prejudice. As Jasmine got ready for her morning class, she thought about Victoria. There was no joy in another person's humiliation, even someone who had tried to humiliate her. But there was profound satisfaction in speaking truth with dignity, in refusing to be lessened by someone else's narrow view. Her thesis now had a perfect conclusion, not about villains or heroes, but about how courage often looks like simply standing in your truth, calmly, clearly, and with compassion even for those who try to tear you down.